Okay.
Well, enjoy yourself, Monday.
Thank you very much, Ron. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the House Committee on Innovation, Internet, and Technology. It's Friday, March 12th. I'm Representative Deborah Gilrein, chair of this committee with my distinguished colleagues. Some members are live and others are Memorex, if you remember that advertising campaign. You may be dating yourself, see? I want to thank the technical team here at the State House. So you have no idea the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to get these hearings on air. So thank you to the men and women at Capitol Television. Our clerk today is Chris O'Brien. Clerk, would you please take the roll of the committee?
Chairwoman Ruggiero,
Here.
Vice Chair Handy, Vice Chair Carson,
Here.
Representative Morey,
Present.
Representative Chippendale, Representative Cortran,
Here, present.
Representative Craven,
Here.
Representative Kennedy,
Here.
Representative Lima, Representative Messier, Representative Morales,
Here.
Representative Place,
Present.
Representative Shanley, Representative Tanzi, Representative Tabone.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We have 4 bills this afternoon. H5509 from Rep. Tabone prohibiting the sale for profit of consumer-generated internet data by social media platforms. H5513 from Rep. Morales requires entities collecting Social Security and personal identification numbers publicly display a privacy protection policy. H5564 from Rep. Vella Wilkinson prohibits certain social media companies from censoring user speech by removing the user's speech. And our final bill, 5925 by Rep. Fenton Fung, is a House resolution requesting our congressional district to obtain funding for free high-speed internet access for public housing. At this time, I'd like a motion to hold bills for further study. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so moved by Chairman Craven and second by Rep. Morales. And clerk, may we take a vote on that, please? Holding bills for further study.
Chairwoman Ruggiero,
Yes.
Vice Chair Handy, Vice Chair Carson,
Yes.
Representative Morey,
Yes.
Representative Chippendale, Representative Cortran,
Yes.
Representative Craven,
Yes.
Representative Kennedy,
Yes.
Representative Lima, Representative Messier, Representative Morales,
Yes.
Representative Place,
No.
Representative Shanley, Representative Tanzi, and Representative Tabone.
Yes.
Thank you. I always like to remind folks who are watching that we hold bills for further study so we can actually hear testimony, as we will this afternoon. The public and advocates are able to write testimony and certainly discuss bills, and that discussion is really critical for us amending and making the bills better. About 60% of our bills are amended thanks to the citizen input, so it's really important. We have a number of people who do wish to testify this afternoon, so you will have 2 minutes to testify. Please let us know, obviously, if you're for or against the bill. We want to hear from everyone, but we also want to get it right, and we want to keep it tight. So if you're not speaking with the reps, please mute your microphone so we don't have any feedback. And at this time, we're up with our first bill, House Bill H5509 from Representative Tabone, prohibiting the sale for profit of consumer-generated internet data by social media platforms. Rep. Tabone, the floor is yours. Is Rep. Tabone with us?
He's muted.
He's muted. Representative, please unmute yourself. Rep. Tabone, you are muted. Are you there, Rep. Tabone? We can always come back to you. I know Rep. Morales is here, and his bill is on deck. So are you ready, Rep. Morales? Let's go to Bill H5513, which requires entities collecting Social Security and personal identification numbers to publicly display privacy protection policies. Thank you, Rep. Morales, for submitting this bill, and the floor is yours.
Yeah. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to discuss and consider House Bill 5513. In summary, this bill would require all online entities, whether they are businesses or individuals, to create and publicly display a privacy protection policy on their website if they are collecting sensitive personal information. For the purpose of this bill, sensitive personal information would include a Social Security number, driver's license number, a state ID number, credit or debit card number, a passport number, an alien registration number, and/or a health insurance ID number. Furthermore, the privacy protection policy for each entity would need to publicly commit to the following: protecting the confidentiality of this personal information, prohibiting unlawful disclosure of this personal information, and limiting access to this personal information. In practice, large companies of all industries and government entities already do this alongside some of our own small businesses. For example, if you visit our state's DMV website, you will be able to easily find their privacy policy page at the top of the webpage. This can also be said for a large company like Amazon and a small business like LaSalle Bakery. Therefore, this will not create an unnecessary burden on any entity, because if they are capable of having a functioning website that can collect this information, then they can easily add an additional page to their site stating their privacy policy without additional expenses or resources. For context, our neighboring state, Connecticut, was the first state to pass this into law in October of 2008. Since then, several other states have followed suit as they have incorporated this requirement when passing their own package of data privacy laws. Overall, this is a fairly simple piece of legislation designed to protect online users and consumers, especially now, as more and more of our daily transactions are happening online daily. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We have one witness on this bill, Randall Rose. And Randall, may we call Randall? And I notice that Randall is on all four bills. Good afternoon, Randall. Are you there?
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. I notice you've signed up on all four of these bills. So if you would you speak to this bill for 2 minutes, and then would you like 60 seconds on the other three bills, and we can take care of all four bills at once? Thank you.
I'd rather respond to the bills as they come up, but if
just for the essence,
there a way back.
as opposed to calling you 4 times. But anyway, why don't you start with this one?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This bill does deal with a real problem about the confidentiality of credit card numbers and Social Security numbers and so on. Unfortunately, I don't think it's strong enough. I do think it won't have a bad effect, but it's not going to have as much effect as I would like. So it's because, first of all, it doesn't really stop companies from transferring your Social Security number or credit card numbers to any other company whatsoever, as long as it's marked confidential, and it doesn't really do all that much to stop hackers from getting those numbers, because it just says that companies should limit access in some unspecified way, and that's not enough of a security requirement. Right now, most privacy policies do absolutely nothing to help the consumer. The privacy policies are just kept vague so that they don't really stop companies from doing anything to violate privacy. And I understand that this bill is going to, at least the idea behind the bill is that the privacy policies will be visible to consumers, and the hope may be that that will put pressure on companies to have robust privacy policies. I don't think it's going to work. Most corporations will still prefer to have vague, meaningless privacy policies, I would like the bill to be considerably stronger to make sure that your personal information is protected and it cannot be transferred for bad reasons. But the bill won't do any harm. It might do a little bit of good, so I'm not against it, but I think it should be considerably stronger. I'm just worried it's going to lead to more meaningless privacy policies that don't do a lot to help consumers. So not opposed to the bill, but I have concerns.
Thank you, Randall. Are there any questions from the committee members for Mr. Rose? Representative Carson.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I actually have a question for the sponsor, and I want to comment on Mr. Rose's remarks. Is that okay?
Yes, please do, and I apologize. I should have asked for comments after Rep. Morales spoke, so forgive me on
That's
that
okay.
one.
That's okay. So I'll comment on Randall's comments first. I agree with Randall. I think that this bill could certainly be stronger. I'm particularly concerned about health data because health data needs to be noted as confidential. I actually just saw a television commercial where Amazon is now selling prescriptive drugs. So I assume they have to be HIPAA compliant, but I don't know that. So there are issues around health data that could be included. There's also issues around student data because all of our students were remote this past year, and kids have put a lot of stuff online. So I'm in favor of strengthening it around under 18 student data, educational data, as well as around health data. My question is to the sponsor, if it's passed in Connecticut, how far down the road do you think they are at implementing it? Because I would think for some large website like Amazon, if they have to do it for Connecticut, we're all going to see it. So does he know anything about the Connecticut implementation?
Rep. Morales, can you answer her question?
Yes, so thank you so much, Representative Carson, for raising that question. So from my understanding, a lot of small businesses, since the implementation of this law in October 2008, have been in compliance with this, and anything that is based in Connecticut understands that when they're starting up a small business or an online entity that collects such information, such as a credit card or debit card number, which is the most common when coming to online transactions, they understand that the requirement is that they have that privacy policy protection in place. And I also just wanted to note, in terms of the conversations that both Randall and Representative Carson raised in terms of, does this bill do enough to protect our online consumers? I want to note that in 2015, the state of Rhode Island did pass the identity theft protection, which already protects online consumer data. It just doesn't require for a public display of it, which this bill would do. So in other words, a lot of the concerns that we're discussing are already addressed in law. This bill is just about making sure that it's public to the online user who does not know that Rhode Island General Law 11-49 exists.
Does that answer your question, Representative Carson?
Yes, it does, but also I do remember that Representative Shanley had a study commission on this, and even though that bill had already passed, we were, and I don't know what Representative Shanley did this year. I'm sorry he's not on the meeting, but we did also last year have specific bills around educational data and healthcare data, and so that was subsequent to the passing of that original bill. So I'm not an expert, but my guess is that there's still some work to be done there, and I would encourage the sponsor to speak to Rep. Shanley about it.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions from members of the committee? I don't see any. Written testimony against the bill comes from Lynette Foray-Menard, and she represents the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce and also references the 2015 Identity Theft Protection Act that the legislature passed. She does say the Chamber believes the Act already protects protections for consumers. Also against is Terry Martesian from Government Affairs. So at this point, that will conclude the hearing on H5513. Thank you, members. Let's now go to H5564 by Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson, who's joining us today. This bill prohibits certain social media companies from censoring users' speech by removing that speech from platforms. Thank you, Chairwoman, for joining us and sharing your bill.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman and members of the committee. House Bill 5564, the Social Media Censorship Protection Act, creates a private right of action that would allow citizens of Rhode Island to bring against the major social media websites that have more than 75 million subscribers and were never affiliated with any religious or political group from their inception, that censored the user for religious or political reasons. So this act would apply to social media websites, including but not limited to Twitter and YouTube, and again, and others. Right now, when a social media website censors a user for religious or political reasons, the victim can sue the social media website for an existing form of breach of contract, bad faith, unfair dealing, unjust enrichment, and false advertising. This act gives teeth to an existing form of actionable conduct and makes litigation realistic. Leading up to introducing this bill, the problem's been that it's been difficult for victims of censorship or the courts to determine how to calculate damages when a social media website deletes a profile for arbitrary reasons. This act would allow the victim to seek statutory damages of $75,000 on top of other forms of damages, so there could be some guarantee of recovery and making it realistic that victims will hold the social media websites accountable. The bill also allows the victim to seek attorney fees and costs. This will incentivize local lawyers to take on the cases. This bill will strengthen the bar and the law economy while deterring social media censorship by leveling the playing field. $75,000 is actually a magic number. It is the jurisdictional minimum to get an injured party into federal district court under diversity jurisdiction. Presumably, the social media website that engaged in the censoring will likely be domiciled in another state, so these matters should be litigated in federal court. It is in many respects easier to litigate in federal court. The state of Rhode Island has a paramount jurisdiction over contract law issues. When someone in this state signs up to use a social media website, they enter into a contract. Rhode Island can set some parameters around those contracts and hold certain actors to higher standards that have been prone to bad acts without accountability. So when a citizen of our state is censored, the courts in this state could have paramount jurisdiction over the controversy under the long-arm statute. The underlying federal constitutional legal basis for this bill is the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. It's true that this state could introduce a bill which treats the major social media websites like public utilities, but simply creating a private right of action is likely a better first step to solve the problem. Basically, the major social media websites have knowingly created a digital public square. This state has a compelling interest to ensure its citizens are permitted to speak their religious and political opinions in any form of quasi-public square. This act better allows the citizens of this state, both liberal and conservative, to share their religious and political views by holding the major social media websites to higher standards of care through carving out a special cause of action. Now, there are some exceptions and exemptions. The social media website can censor certain speech, like pornography, accounts that are falsely impersonating, or speech that calls for immediate acts of violence. So,
Okay. Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee for the rep on the bill? I don't see any. Thank you so much for your presentation.
thank you, Madam Chair.
And now, as we go to those who are testifying, Cameron Schulte, the Harlan Institute, no position. Good afternoon, Cameron, are you there?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman.
Would you please lower the volume on your television so we can hear you? We're getting some feedback.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, you have 2 minutes, please. State your case for us.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for holding a hearing on House Bill 5564, legislation that provides ocean staters legal standing and recourse when they have been censored or deplatformed on the various social media platforms that have become ubiquitous and integral to contemporary political speech and expression. My name is Cameron Schulte, and I am the Director of Government Relations at the Harlan Institute. The Harlan Institute is a 37-year-old independent national nonprofit organization whose mission is to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions to social and economic problems. A consensus has yet to emerge on the best way to address big tech's censorship of voices on its platforms in a way that recognizes and reinforces America's treasured tradition of free speech, either ideologically or practically. That is, though, ultimately a generous and perhaps naive reading of the current landscape. Of course, you and I are free to use or not use the products offered by Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, or Apple and Google. Of that, there ought to be no question. However, to forego using products as ubiquitous and woven into the fabric of our modern daily life is to forego being engaged with family and friends or knowing in real time what our elected officials are doing or not doing on our behalf, or to struggle to grow a small business and procure customers. So here we are today challenging the behavior of big tech, which has been less than transparent and lacks respect for the moral responsibilities that it has as a primary outlet for political discourse in our nation and the dissemination of information of public import. Industry opponents of this idea of providing redress for censorship and suppression enjoy a government-sanctioned market where the dominant players are largely immune to competition by which our economy is underpinned. That Section 230 of the 1996 Telecommunications Decency Act exists is prima facie evidence of a corrupted market. HB 5564 should spur a state-based national debate on the role of big tech in our civic conversation. Ocean staters should be clear that robust public debate is sacrosanct, and any action or failure to act to ensure a robust debate will be met with hard questions and, if necessary, enabling policies. Thank you for your time today, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Cameron, for your testimony and for joining us this afternoon. Are there any questions for this witness from members of the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next guest, which is Christopher Gilrein from TechNet. Not sure I pronounced that correctly. Christopher, are you there?
Hi there, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Go ahead. The floor is yours, sir.
My name is Chris Gilrein. I represent TechNet throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. TechNet is a diverse coalition of companies representing industries and business models that span the innovation economy, from startups to some of the most recognizable global brands. I'm here to testify in opposition to HB 5564, which would upend content moderation policies as we know it by subjecting social media platforms to potential legal liabilities for removing objectionable content. Our members are committed to keeping their users safe online, which is why social media companies review millions of pieces of content every day in order to remove content that is harmful, illegal, or otherwise conflicts with their policies. HB 5564 would enable anyone in Rhode Island to sue platforms for removing any content, putting platforms in the unenviable position of deciding between a number of undesirable choices. Do they stop monitoring content at all for fear of legal retribution? They move away from being a neutral site, as the bill allows the creation of sites that have one specific viewpoint, creating an even more polarized internet than we have already? Or do they simply remove access to services in jurisdictions that have these laws in place? Content moderation is about providing a safe and enjoyable experience for the people who populate this virtual community. This bill would hamstring moderation efforts and force platforms to expose their users to content that violates the established standards of that community. If enacted, many legal observers say that this bill would face swift legal challenge and likely defeat. If it did survive, Rhode Island courts would likely be inundated with claims under the statute, putting the state in a position of playing referee to what constitutes acceptable speech. Meanwhile, Rhode Islanders would be exposed to more dangerous, obscene, and objectionable content online, as moderation practices are necessarily relaxed or eliminated to avoid litigation. We ask that the committee reject this bill, and I welcome any questions. I did submit written testimony as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gilrein. Are there any questions for this witness from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. We'll move down the list. And joining us again is Randall Rose, who is in support of this bill. Hello again, Mr. Rose.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. So And I would also like to thank Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson for introducing this very helpful bill. It's, as she said, this is a bill backed by people from across the political spectrum. A lot of people are worried about the huge power that big social media companies have, and there have been a number of controversial cases of social media companies removing people's speech in rather arbitrary ways, and currently, if your speech is removed by a social media company, you can't appeal outside the company, and you can be banned from the platform, and you won't be able to communicate with the rest of the public. And in this day and age, social media platforms are the primary means for communication, for mass communication from ordinary people, for public debate, and as Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson said, without necessarily wanting to treat them as utilities, legally, they are, in effect, indispensable utilities for 99% of Americans. And what this bill does is simply make sure that anybody can access these social media companies regardless of their beliefs, and can speak on these large social media companies without censorship and without those companies using their power to favor or disfavor certain viewpoints by an algorithm.
Thank you, Mr. Rose.
May I suggest a couple slight changes. I just want to say that near the end of the bill, where it says grant standing, it says that only users who are over 18 shall have standing. It should say that users who are over 18 will have standing, to make clear that they actually do have standing. And the definition, the bill, which Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson did not write, makes it detour into a contentious definition of hate speech, which is really irrelevant. So I would suggest.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. I recommend you share these thoughts with Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson. And thank you, too, for always being so thoughtful in providing testimony on so many of our bills. Does anyone have a question for Randall Rose? Seeing none from the committee, we will now go to Carl Szabo from NetChoice, who is opposed to the bill. Mr. Szabo, are you? Hello, Mr. Szabo. Good afternoon.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Sorry, my TV was a half-second behind. So thank you for having me. My name is Carl Szabo. I'm Vice President and General Counsel of NetChoice. I'm also an adjunct professor at the George Mason Law School. I'd like to first start by making clear that I humbly ask that you do not advance this legislation, and by addressing some of the constitutional questions that were first raised. Now, the first is that breach of contract. When you sign up to use these services, it's a two-party contract. One, the services agree to provide you access to billions of dollars of innovation, the costs of development, the servers on which they're maintained, the internet access. You, as the user, agree to abide by certain community standards. And those community standards also include a contract from the service to the end user that you will not be exposed to certain types of offensive content to the best that they can prevent it. So the notion that if somebody were to put up horrible racist content or horrible violent content and the platform could not remove it, well, that's actually a breach of contract by the user itself. Second, are they a public square? Well, I don't even have to guess at the answer to that because PragerU, a conservative platform who enjoys free distribution on YouTube. Actually, they've got over 1 billion views so far. Well, they sued Google because 5% of Prager's videos were tagged as inappropriate for children. So they were not shown in homes where parents had to turn on restricted mode on YouTube. Well, PragerU argued that it violated their First Amendment protection. And the Ninth Circuit Court, and I will just quote you, said, despite YouTube's ubiquity and its role as a public-facing platform, it remains a private platform. not a public forum subject to judicial scrutiny under the First Amendment. And that's the thing that I think is often misunderstood. The First Amendment is actually what protects social media platforms from bills like H5564, not the other way around. Now, what would H5564 mean for the residents of Rhode Island? Well, essentially, if ISIS recruitment posts were placed online, these platforms would be in violation of the bill if it removed it because it denies ISIS's political speech. Spam messages of a political or religious nature could not be blocked. Speech from hate groups could not be blocked because to them it's their political speech. Posts by white supremacists to a synagogue's Facebook or YouTube page could not be removed. What about a platform that decides not to allow any political speech whatsoever and perhaps giving us a safe haven from all the political conversations? Well,
Thank
they
you,
can't do
Mr.
that.
Szabo. Thank you. Could you please wrap up?
Yes, ma'am. Just to be clear on the private right of action, the way it's currently written, just one post would create statutory damages of $37 billion because it not only applies to the person whose content was removed, but to anyone who might have seen it.
Thank you very much for your testimony today. We've given you a lot of leeway here. The doorbell has rung a couple of times. That's usually
I
a little
apologize,
timer.
ma'am.
That's okay. Now, we usually do 2 minutes, but we've let you go a little bit longer. You had some interesting legal issues. Are there any questions to Mr. Szabo from the committee? Anyone? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much for your testimony today. We greatly appreciate you being here today. Our next witness is Hannah Stern from the ACLU of Rhode Island. She is opposed. And joining us is Hannah Stern. Ms. Stern, welcome.
Hi. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for your time this afternoon. My name is Hannah Stern. I'm testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island in strong opposition to this piece of legislation. Most importantly, we believe that this legislation is actually outside of the jurisdiction of the General Assembly. As previous testimonies have noted, from our perspective, this bill is in direct conflict with and preempted by Section 230 of the Federal Communications Decency Act, which provides immunity from liability to internet media platforms for the speech of their users. But aside from this preemption, we also think it's worthwhile to point out that the implementation of this bill would be virtually impossible due to just how vague the language of the bill actually is. So in just one example, the bill would bar the removal of religious speech, which in its definition includes the parameters of, quote, what humans should or should not be doing. Frankly, it's hard to imagine what would not be covered by this criteria, yet the exemptions would allow a platform to ban speech if it's from a, quote, inauthentic source. But again, with no definitions for what that could even entail, the discretion would be left to the platform to just rely on guesswork as to what may or may not be restricted. But most critically, aside from being both, we believe, legally and practically unenforceable, this legislation would just set an extremely, extremely dangerous precedent in allowing the government to dictate to private platforms what the content of their speech permissibly may be. So for these reasons, we really strongly urge rejection of this piece of legislation. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stern. Any questions for Hannah Stern from the members? No, you're getting off easy today, Ms. Stern. Thank you so much for making such great points. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you stay well. Enjoy your weekend. And that concludes the verbal testimony. I would like to read into the record. We have written testimony against this from John Olson, State Government Affairs, New England Region, John McDade, a Portsmouth resident, and also Tammy Cota from Internet Coalition. And that concludes the hearing on House Bill 5564. And I believe Representative Tabone is with us. Hopefully he has some audio now, and I'd like to put into play.
I am on.
Yay. H5509, Rep. Tabone, prohibiting the sale for profit of consumer-generated internet data by a social media platform. The floor is yours, Rep.
Thank you, Chairwoman and members. The reason I put this in, it's very simple. I am not looking to be an influencer, and those who are looking to be influencers are actively looking to create a following, and that following generates revenue for them. But there are those individuals who either have curiosity or are entertained by some of the things that come on social media platforms, or are just looking at the news, whatever it may be that's coming out. Well, every time that we open up a page or we click on something, we are giving valuable information to social media platforms to be able to then gather that, profile us, and sell it to another entity and make their money. I am all for that. I'm a capitalist at heart. I believe that if you figure out a way to make money, that's great. But when you need me to make money, even though I'm not intentionally looking for a following to make money, I think we should share in those profits. And if it was an industry that was struggling, I would understand that, maybe it would be an overreach on our part. But we as a society have pretty much entered into this world, and you can't get out. And once you're in it, your information, other than being public, because we decide how much information we want to put out there, it's what the area that I want to focus on is the fact that every time we click, every time we are providing information that creates value for them, and it should also create additional value for us. So with that said, that's pretty much the intent of my bill. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Representative. It's an interesting concept. For every time Facebook data mines something from the users, they send a check to the Facebook user or social media platform. Interesting concept. Any questions for Rep. Tabone and his bill from members of the committee? Okay, seeing none. We have one person who would like to testify. Again, Randall Rose joins us. Good afternoon. Mr. Rose, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. So please tell us 2 minutes. I believe you have no position, so you have 2 minutes to be not for or against.
Thank you. That's a big constraint there. This bill does deal with an important abuse, how individuals, Rhode Islanders' data is being sold and exploited without consent and without compensation. And there have been a lot of efforts. There have been a lot of efforts and discussion to make sure consumers are paid for that data, which generally they're not now. The reason why it's fair, why a lot of people feel it's fair for consumers to be paid for that data, is that data can be sold because it gets sold and exploited by a whole ecosystem of companies. It ends up being used often against the consumer. The profile that's collected about you it can be used in ways that are against your interests, which is why people are talking about compensating the consumer. But I do feel this bill doesn't say enough about to ensure that consumers get more than token compensation. As some of the written testimony has pointed out, there's not a lot of definitions in the bill. A lot of key terms like social media are left undefined, most importantly, it talks about consent, but doesn't make sure that this is meaningful opt-in consent. Social media platforms already claim, as you heard in earlier testimony, they already claim that you automatically consent to everything they do just by using it. And simply being forced to click "I agree" is not real consent. When it comes to platforms gathering your data and using it to profile you against your interests, you shouldn't be forced to click "I agree." You should have a meaningful option of saying no and continuing to use the platform without your data being sold and used against you. So I do think that something more specific would be helpful in addressing these issues, but I do applaud Representative Tabone for trying to do something about this ongoing abuse. And I hope we can have a more specific, more detailed bill on this at some point.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Rose, for your testimony. Some very interesting points. I would like to put into the record some written testimony. We have John Olson from State Government Affairs is against, and that concludes the hearing for House Bill 5509. I'd like to take up House Bill 5925 from Representative Fenton Fung, who's joining us this afternoon. This is a House resolution requesting our congressional district to obtain funding for free high-speed internet access for public housing. Welcome, Representative Fenton Fong.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. So one of the things that we've tried to take away from COVID is what can we do to improve our public health infrastructure here in the state post-COVID. One of the really interesting things that came out of this pandemic is that the proliferation of telemedicine really took a big jump forward. Out in the healthcare world, of course, we would all be like, oh, well, you know what? We know you can't come in today, but unfortunately, we'd be like, let's do a telemedicine visit. What we realized is that in the public housing authorities, there is no high-speed internet access actually wired into these buildings. We took a quick survey of all the different public housing authorities, and nobody could really find one particular city or town that was doing this as a big initiative. There were some towers that had free high-speed internet access in a foyer area, which was inaccessible to them during the pandemic. They weren't allowed to leave their apartments. So what does that mean to us? That means from a Medicaid standpoint, we're paying for more ambulance or van rides to a doctor's office. I also take a look at the next 5 years of all the digital medicine and digital tech that's going to be coming out in the world of medicine. We're talking about managing our diabetes better at home. We already have digital sensors, but it requires you to have an internet access to upload that to your doctor to avoid another doctor's visit. So I take a look at it from a public health standpoint. How do we make our seniors healthier? If you look at public housing, typically that is the last step per se before we need to go into something more like an assisted living or a nursing home type, kind of like escalation of care. So we want to do everything possible to avoid that, not only for the individual, but for the added costs. So I say like, all right, well, what can we do from a cost-saving perspective? Let's make them as active as possible. Let's make them as healthy as possible. We also are very aware of the social isolation. We don't expect another pandemic next year, but in case it is, we look at what can we do? We saw so many hospitalizations for depression, escalation of dementia-related issues. And I think when we're talking about what can we do in the future to make our public housing authorities healthier, we're going to be in a good spot when they all have digital access. It's one thing to have an iPad given to you, but if you don't have the internet connection, it's not there. We can't do anything with it. I did already talk to our congressional delegation with Congressman Cicilline and Congressman Langevin staff. There were scattered programs before. Some people might be familiar with something called Connect Home. That program was a kind of a pilot program and is not accepting any new states or municipalities. The city of Los Angeles actually decided to move their public housing to free internet access. They're trying it for a year to see what they can do to bring their costs down. So I'm taking a look at globally, what can we do for our seniors, not only to improve their social connectivity with the world, but also make them healthier and avoid some of those added costs after. So it's a very simple resolution asking for this to kind of come to fruition by 2024. Nothing happens tomorrow. But I appreciate the consideration, hope it passes.
Well, thank you very much. It's very important. As a matter of fact, there's no one testifying it verbally. We do have some written testimony from Brenda Clement from Housing Works Rhode Island, and she's certainly validating much of what you're saying. 5% of homeowners with mortgages lack internet service in Rhode Island, but that number jumps to 22% of renters statewide. So there is a harmful inequity in light of COVID and just with the digital divide in this state. So,
and it's really interesting too, because we thought, oh, they could just use their smartphones.
No,
well,
it doesn't work that way.
Only
that's
19,
and that's why the dedicated fiber optic broadband, which we've talked about in another bill, which is my bill here, is so important. Also, the Federal Emergency Broadband Benefit Program was enacted last year, and there are dollars. I know Congress, the FCC actually met in February, and that money is going to be going to internet providers to actually provide $50 per month to low-income houses and also $100 off the price of a laptop or a computer for certain households that qualify. So you're on the right track. The Biden administration is totally working on this in the future, the next couple of months, but this is a great resolution, and I sure hope we pass it out. I'm not sure why you didn't do it by immediate consideration.
And it's one of those things, too, that you don't always see Republicans get up here and say, let's give away free things, but this is something that's it's actually going to save us money in the big picture here. And like I said, I appreciate obviously, the consideration. And when you look at the discrepancies between, not only talking about renters and homeowners, but then once we look into families of color.
That's right.
And families in public housing, this is just it drops off dramatically. Only 1 in every 5 elders right now over the age of 80 owns a smartphone. And if you can only imagine them trying to show a doctor like a growth on their back with using an iPhone, it just doesn't work.
Thank you very much, Representative. We
Thank you.
appreciate you coming by to the committee this afternoon. Any questions for the sponsor of the bill from the committee members? Okay, seeing Representative Cortrin, I see your hand going up. Thank you.
Hi, yes, I have a question for the sponsor.
Please proceed.
I can't see Rep. Fung anymore, but I suppose she's still there. Would this just be for senior housing, or this would be for all? Can you just repeat exactly what kind of housing? Only housing that goes through a public housing authority? Is that what the bill says? Am I understanding it correctly?
So the bill itself says public housing authority, which is rather comprehensive. Again, we're trying to target the people who can't afford things the most, okay, that are already stressed out by things like utilities and medications. If you're in public housing, you already need quite a bit of assistance. Obviously, I'm of the sense that high-speed internet access should be rather much cheaper than it is now and much more affordable region-wide and nationwide, but right here, this is just targeting public housing authorities.
There is some subsidized housing that probably would fit other qualifications, but they're not under the control of a public housing authority. So
right.
they wouldn't be factored in this.
Yeah, it's not
right?
just seniors. When we're talking about people with disabilities, okay, this is another huge divide. And when you're talking about digital tech and the potential for that in the future, they're the ones who will benefit the most. So that's where we are here.
And it's
I think it's a great idea.
It is a great idea.
I was trying to see how we could expand it, but I think it's a great idea.
Next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rep. Thank you, Rep. Cortrin, for your comments as well, and certainly the emergency broadband benefit program that the feds have unveiled last month certainly will help, but let's push our congressional delegation to do even more for our low-income and seniors in public housing. That concludes the hearing. Yes. Oh, I apologize. I forgot. Yes, we do have Randall Rose would like to speak on this bill as well. Randall, sorry about that. Good afternoon again, Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd also like to thank Representative Benton Fung, who just after being elected for the first time is already introducing a great bill like this. So as has been said, this is more a kind of resolution that should enjoy immediate consent, so I'm not going to spend that much time supporting it. Its merit should be obvious. I do want to mention a couple points. First of all, to get HUD funding, obviously you have to have an application. So it's also important for especially the cities and towns to apply for this HUD funding in the first place with the support of the state. So it should be not only directed to the congressional delegation, but also to the appropriate authorities here in Rhode Island. Second, as Representative Benton Fung pointed out, regardless of whether it's HUD's funding or not, this is a kind of spending that actually saves us money because we can't afford to have so much of our population outside the range of high-speed internet and unable to participate in all that entails. So we'll actually save money. So the cost of setting this up is already a good investment, whether it's HUD funding or not, because it's going to save us more money in the future. And so I do suggest broadening the list of recipients of this resolution, the addressees, but I would also say that if we're here this time next year and we don't have that HUD funding, then it may be time to start looking into the General Assembly providing that funding themselves. But because it is a good investment. But that said, I'm totally in agreement with this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. We appreciate that feedback. There's no doubt the digital divide is worrisome. That's why we need a broadband coordinator in this state to oversee the federal funding that we're not getting. And I applaud Representative Benton Fung for reaching out to our federal delegation for even more money for public housing. That concludes the hearing on the 4 bills that we had today. in the House Committee on Innovation, Internet, and Technology. I want to thank the committee members. May we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. I'm Deborah Giro. Stay well. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.